An abusive husband beat the Mafia boss's pregnant sister. Then a poor waitress stepped in. One working streetlight. That's all the silent lot behind Rosalino's had to offer at 11:40 p.m. Weak orange light barely reaching the cracked asphalt where Marisol Reyes hauled a bag of trash toward the dumpster. Then she heard it, the specific wet sound of a fist against flesh. A woman's voice, trying and failing to stay quiet. 7 months pregnant, on her knees against the brick wall, one arm curled protectively over her stomach. Marisol didn't know her name. She didn't know the man standing over her controlled half the city's underworld from 3 blocks away, watching everything unfold on a security feed he'd never expected to need. She grabbed a trash can lid and stepped into the dark anyway. Subscribe right now and drop your city in the comments, because what happens in the next 4 minutes is going to leave you speechless. Like, share, notifications on. You are not ready for this story. Marisol Reyes had worked 8 months at Rosalino's, closing shifts mostly. The specific exhausting rhythm of double shifts that kept her younger brother enrolled in community college after their parents' deaths left her the only family he had left. She was 26, sharp-eyed despite the exhaustion carved permanently into her posture, carrying herself through every shift with the specific, quiet determination of a woman who'd learned early that nobody else was coming to hold anything together for her. She'd never once in her entire adult life been able to walk past someone in trouble. It had cost her jobs before, this particular instinct, intervening in situations that weren't technically her business. Refusing to look away when looking away would have been considerably easier. Tonight, hauling a bag of trash toward the dumpster after picking up an extra shift to cover January's heating bill, that same instinct pulled her attention toward a sound she almost convinced herself she'd imagined, a fist connecting with flesh. Wet, controlled, deliberate, a woman's voice, choked and desperate, trying to keep quiet and failing. Marisol froze for exactly 1 second, the trash bag still in her hand, before her feet carried her toward the sound, without her conscious mind fully catching up. Sofia Marchetti knelt against the restaurant's brick exterior, 7 months pregnant, one arm curled protectively around her swollen stomach, while the other braced against the wall for support. Blood traced a thin line from her split lip. Her husband stood over her. His voice dropped into a low, venomous hiss that carried none of the charm Marisol had occasionally glimpsed through the restaurant's front windows when the couple dined together. "You embarrassed me in front of my business partners." Daniel's voice carried controlled, terrifying calm despite the violence he'd just delivered. "You know exactly what happens when you embarrass me, Sofia." Sofia's whispered response carried genuine, exhausted fear. "Please." The baby. Marisol didn't know either of their names. She didn't know that the woman bleeding against that brick wall was the only sister of Vincent Marchetti, the most feared crime boss on the Eastern Seaboard. She didn't know his organization had eyes on this exact restaurant 24 hours a day specifically because his sister ate dinner there every Thursday night with a husband Vincent had never trusted and never once been given sufficient reason to act against. What Marisol knew was simple. A pregnant woman was being beaten 11 feet away from her, and every instinct she'd ever possessed refused to let that continue while she stood by watching. Her eyes landed on the metal trash can lid, propped against the dumpster. She grabbed it without conscious decision, her heart hammering as she crossed the remaining distance and stepped directly into the space between Daniel and his kneeling wife. "Get away from her!" Her voice came out steadier than she felt, the trash can lid raised defensively between them. Daniel's head snapped toward her, genuine shock crossing his features at the sudden interruption of what he'd clearly believed was a completely private moment. "Mind your own business." His voice carried immediate, dangerous fury. "This doesn't concern you. She's on the ground bleeding." Marisol's voice carried genuine, unshaken conviction, despite the obvious danger radiating from the man in front of her. "That makes it my business." Daniel's fury shifted target with devastating speed. his attention fully leaving Sophia and locking onto Marisol instead. "You have no idea who you're interfering with. I don't need to know who you are." Marisol's grip on the trash can lid tightened. "I know what I'm looking at." Daniel took a step closer, his controlled composure cracking into something considerably more volatile as he processed being confronted by a complete stranger in what should have been an isolated, private moment. "Put that down before you make this considerably worse for yourself." Sophia's voice, weak but urgent, cut through the tension from where she remained crouched against the wall. "Please, just go inside. You don't understand what you're doing." Marisol's eyes flicked toward Sophia for exactly 1 second, genuine concern crossing her features at the specific desperate warning in the pregnant woman's voice. She didn't move. "I'm not leaving you out here with him." Daniel's hand shot out with sudden, violent speed, closing around Marisol's wrist with bruising force before she could react, the trash can lid clattering to the pavement as he yanked her toward him. "You want to insert yourself into my marriage?" His voice carried genuine, escalating rage. "Fine. Let's see how brave you feel when..." The restaurant's back door burst open with explosive force. 3 men in dark, tailored suits moved into the parking lot with controlled, terrifying speed, their coordinated movement carrying nothing of the chaotic uncertainty that should have accompanied random bystanders investigating a disturbance. Daniel's grip on Marisol's wrist faltered as genuine confusion crossed his features, his fury giving way to sudden, uncertain alarm at the sight of professional, armed men converging on the scene with such immediate precision. One of the men pressed a finger against an earpiece, his voice carrying flat, absolute urgency as he spoke into a connection Marisol couldn't hear. "Boss, you need to see this now." Marcus Vane's security team secured the parking lot within seconds, 2 men flanking Daniel's position with controlled, coordinated precision, while the third crouched beside Sophia, his voice carrying gentle, professional urgency as he assessed her condition. Daniel's confused fury shifted instantly into genuine alarm, his grip on Marisol's wrist finally releasing as he processed exactly how quickly professional, armed men had responded to a confrontation he'd believed entirely private. "Who are you people?" His voice carried desperate, uncertain confusion. The nearest security operative didn't answer, his attention fixed on his earpiece as he relayed updates to whoever controlled this rapid, devastating response. Marisol stood frozen, her wrist throbbing where Daniel's grip had left angry red marks, her mind racing to process exactly how she'd gone from taking out the trash to being surrounded by armed men in tailored suits. She had no idea what she'd stumbled into. 4 minutes later, a black sedan pulled into the parking lot with controlled, deliberate speed, and a man emerged whose presence immediately reorganized the entire atmosphere of the confrontation. Vincent Marchetti crossed the pavement with devastating, unhurried authority, his eyes finding his sister crumpled against the brick wall before landing on Daniel with an expression that carried none of the loud rage the scene might have produced from a lesser man. Controlled fury radiated from him with a specific quality that made even his own security team instinctively step back. "Sophia." His voice cracked with genuine, unguarded emotion despite its overall control as he crouched beside his sister, his hands hovering carefully over her injuries without quite touching, clearly assessing damage while restraining himself from causing further pain. "Vincent." Sophia's voice carried genuine relief mixed with devastating shame. 2 years of careful, protective silence finally, catastrophically breaking in front of witnesses she'd never intended to have. "I'm sorry. I didn't want you to see this." Vincent's controlled composure cracked slightly at those words, genuine anguish crossing his features before he forced his attention back toward assessing her physical condition. "You don't apologize for this. Never for this." He turned his head toward Daniel, and the temperature of the entire parking lot seemed to drop several degrees. His voice, when it finally came, carried flat, devastating quiet that promised violence considerably more absolute than anything Daniel had ever experienced in his entire life. "You put your hands on my sister in front of a witness." Daniel's face drained of color completely, genuine terror finally replacing his earlier confused fury as he processed exactly whose family he'd just assaulted in front of an unconnected stranger. "Vincent, I can explain." Vincent's controlled voice cut through Daniel's attempted explanation with absolute finality. "You can explain to my lawyers. Right now, you're going to stand perfectly still while my men decide whether that's actually a request or simply a courtesy." Two of Vincent's security operatives moved to flank Daniel immediately, their coordinated positioning leaving no doubt about the specific consequence awaiting any attempt at resistance or flight. Vincent's attention shifted toward Marisol, genuine recognition crossing his controlled features as he processed exactly what she'd apparently done. Stepped between a pregnant stranger and an enraged man with nothing but a trash can lid and pure instinct. He rose from beside his sister slowly, crossing the distance toward Marisol, with an expression she couldn't fully interpret. "You're the one who intervened." His voice carried careful, deliberate assessment, rather than the threat she might have logically expected. Marisol's own composure steadied, despite the obvious shock of everything unfolding around her, her voice carrying genuine, careful honesty. "I heard someone in trouble. I didn't know who either of them were. I just reacted." Vincent studied her for a long moment, something unreadable moving behind his controlled expression. "You had no idea who you were confronting. None." Marisol's voice carried genuine, unwavering conviction despite everything. "It wouldn't have mattered either way." Vincent's expression shifted slightly, genuine, unexpected gratitude beginning to replace his earlier controlled fury as he processed the specific weight of what a complete stranger had just accomplished. "You have no idea what you just did tonight." His voice carried careful, deliberate gravity. Marisol's confusion deepened at that statement, her exhausted mind still trying to process the specific magnitude of the situation surrounding her. "I just stopped someone from hurting a pregnant woman." Vincent's expression carried genuine, complicated weight as he glanced back toward Sophia, then toward Daniel, then finally back toward Marisol. "You interrupted something my own organization has spent 2 years quietly investigating without ever finding legitimate justification to act. My sister insisted repeatedly that I not intervene, that she could handle her marriage on her own terms." His voice carried devastating, controlled honesty. "Tonight, you did what none of us could accomplish through patience or restraint." Marisol's own exhaustion and shock finally began settling fully into her chest, genuine uncertainty crossing her features as she processed exactly how significant this stranger's gratitude apparently was. "I don't understand what any of that means." Vincent's expression carried genuine, careful weight as one of his security operatives approached with urgent updates about Daniel's custody arrangements requiring immediate attention. "It means Daniel Cross is not simply going to accept losing tonight quietly." His voice carried absolute, devastating certainty. "And I need you to understand exactly what kind of danger you may have just placed yourself directly in the path of." Marcus Vane's team began the careful process of securing Daniel for formal police involvement, medical personnel arriving simultaneously to properly assess Sophia's condition beyond what the parking lot's dim lighting had allowed. Vincent's attention remained fixed on Marisol despite the controlled chaos unfolding around them. Genuine, growing concern crossing his features as he processed exactly how thoroughly an ordinary waitress's instinctive courage had just collided catastrophically with his family's dangerous world. "Your name." His voice carried careful, deliberate focus. "Marisol." Her voice carried genuine, exhausted uncertainty, despite her earlier steady composure. "Marisol Reyes." Vincent studied her for a long moment, something settling behind his controlled expression that carried weight considerably beyond simple gratitude. "Marisol Reyes, I need you to come with my people tonight, not because you're in trouble, but because Daniel Cross is about to discover exactly how much he's lost, and men in his position rarely accept that kind of loss without attempting something considerably more dangerous first." Sophia's medical evaluation confirmed both her and the baby remained stable despite the assault, the specific clinical relief of that news settling over Vincent's controlled composure as he sat beside his sister's hospital bed hours later. "I need you to tell me everything." His voice carried genuine, careful gravity. "Not the version you've been giving me for 3 years. What actually happened?" Sophia's eyes carried genuine, exhausted resignation, as 2 years of careful protective silence finally, completely dissolved. It started small. Comments about my friends, my time, things that seemed like normal marriage adjustments at first. Her voice carried devastating, methodical precision as the full pattern began surfacing. Then it became about controlling who I saw, where I went, how I spent every hour of my day. Vincent's controlled fury, built with each devastating detail, his jaw tightening as his sister's account unfolded with terrible clarity. "Why didn't you tell me?" Sophia's voice cracked with genuine, exhausted honesty. "Because he knew exactly how to use your world against me. He'd tell me if I ever involved you. He couldn't predict what might happen to him, that I'd be responsible for whatever your organization did in response." Her eyes carried genuine, devastating vulnerability. "I was terrified of losing you either way. If I told you and something happened to Daniel, or if I stayed silent and something happened to me." Vincent's own devastating reckoning crystallized with terrible clarity, understanding now that his sister's repeated insistence he not intervene had been driven by genuine, calculated fear rather than genuine safety or independence. "I should have pushed harder. I should have never accepted your explanations so easily." His voice carried genuine, unguarded self-recrimination. Sophia's hand found his, genuine gratitude crossing her exhausted features despite everything. "You respected what I asked for. That's not something to apologize for." Marisol, meanwhile, found herself settled into a private suite within the same hospital. Vincent's insistence on covering her medical evaluation, following Daniel's grip injury, carrying genuine, complicated investment that extended considerably beyond simple gratitude. Rosa Delgado arrived within the hour, her own protective instincts fully activated once she understood the scope of what had happened in her restaurant's parking lot. "I should have noticed something was wrong." Rosa's voice carried genuine, guilty conviction as she settled into the chair beside Marisol's hospital bed. "Daniel came in every Thursday. I never once suspected what was actually happening." Marisol's own exhausted composure carried genuine, careful honesty. "Nobody suspects it until they see it directly. That's exactly how it works." Rosa's own knowledge of Daniel's patterns during his regular Thursday visits provided Vincent's investigation with crucial additional context once he arrived to check on Marisol's condition. Details about specific behavioral patterns and controlling comments Sophia hadn't fully disclosed, even during her own hospital confession. He always insisted on paying separately from other tables. Rosa's voice carried genuine, growing recognition as she processed details she'd never fully examined until now. Always wanted a booth in the back corner. Never wanted staff lingering near their table for longer than absolutely necessary. Vincent's controlled expression carried genuine, devastating understanding. Isolation tactics, even during what should have been public, safe interactions. The following morning, Daniel's release from police custody arrived considerably faster than Vincent had anticipated, his family's considerable legal resources securing bail and delaying formal charges through procedural maneuvering that carried genuine, dangerous implications for everyone connected to the previous night's confrontation. Marcus Vane delivered the update to Vincent with controlled, professional urgency. "He's out." Legal team moved fast, secured conditions that technically satisfy the restraining order without actually restricting his movement significantly. Vincent's controlled fury carried absolute, devastating certainty. He's not simply going to disappear quietly. His voice carried genuine, growing concern. 2 years of careful control just collapsed in front of a witness with no connection to my family whatsoever. He understands exactly what that means for his exposure now. Daniel, released and processing the catastrophic collapse of everything he'd spent 3 years carefully constructing, retreated to his own apartment, with genuine, escalating desperation building beneath his outward composure. His research began within hours. Careful searches into Rosalino's staff records, employee schedules, anything that might provide insight into exactly where Marisol Reyes lived and worked, beyond the restaurant itself. His calculated reasoning carried devastating, dangerous clarity. Without her testimony, without an independent witness corroborating Sophia's account, the case against him remained considerably more circumstantial, dependent entirely on his wife's word against his own carefully maintained public reputation. Eliminating that witness might be the only path toward salvaging any version of his previous life. Marcus Vane's surveillance team, monitoring Daniel's movements as standard precaution following his release, intercepted communication 3 days later that transformed the entire situation's urgency into something considerably more dangerous than anyone had initially anticipated. "Boss, we have a problem." Marcus's voice carried genuine, controlled alarm as he presented the intercepted evidence to Vincent directly. Daniel's been asking questions. Staff schedules at Rosalino's, specifically focused on Marisol's shifts and home address. Vincent's controlled composure shattered completely, genuine, devastating recognition crossing his features as the full implication settled over him. He's not simply trying to disappear. His voice carried absolute, growing horror. He's planning to eliminate the one witness capable of testifying against him before any formal proceedings can move forward. Vincent's response carried immediate, absolute urgency, his organization's full protective resources mobilizing around Marisol within the hour, with the same priority he'd extend to his own family. Full security detail, immediately. His voice carried devastating, controlled command as Marcus coordinated the response. Marisol goes nowhere without protection until this threat is completely neutralized. Marisol, informed of the escalating danger, processed the information with genuine, clear-eyed practicality, despite the obvious fear underlying her composure. "I'm not simply hiding while this unfolds." Her voice carried firm, unwavering conviction. "I want to understand exactly what's happening, and what I can actually do to help ensure he faces real consequences." Vincent studied her with genuine, growing respect at her refusal to simply accept passive protection. "Your testimony, combined with Sophia's account, creates exactly the kind of comprehensive evidence his family's usual legal resources will struggle considerably to suppress." Sophia, her own strength growing throughout the unfolding crisis despite her physical recovery still in progress, insisted on providing her own detailed testimony alongside Marisol's witness account. The two women's combined statements building a case against Daniel, considerably more comprehensive than 3 years of isolated abuse alone could have produced. "Thank you." Sophia's voice carried genuine, unguarded gratitude during a quiet visit to Marisol's protected safe house days later. "You didn't know who I was. You didn't know any of this. You just saw someone in trouble and helped anyway." Marisol's exhausted but genuine smile carried quiet conviction. "That's the only kind of help that actually matters." Marcus Vane's surveillance team continued monitoring Daniel's movements with meticulous precision, their preparation anticipating exactly the kind of cornered, desperate retaliation a fully exposed man might attempt once every legitimate path toward protecting his reputation had collapsed entirely. Daniel's operation moved 4 days later, his careful surveillance of Marisol's protected location, believing he'd identified a vulnerable window in her security coverage. He found instead the full, coordinated capability of Vincent's security apparatus, waiting specifically because Marcus's team had anticipated his approach with devastating precision. The confrontation unfolded with brutal, controlled efficiency, Daniel's desperate attempt at eliminating the witness, instead providing the final, undeniable evidence needed to ensure his complete legal and personal downfall. His apprehension, caught in the act of attempted violence against a protected witness, stripped away any remaining possibility of his family's legal resources, minimizing the mounting evidence against him. Formal charges proceeded within days, comprehensive and airtight, Daniel's own desperate actions providing exactly the undeniable proof that 3 years of Sophia's careful silence and Marisol's single act of instinctive courage had needed to finally achieve genuine, lasting consequence. Weeks passed following the crisis's complete resolution. Sophia's son, born safely into a family, finally, genuinely rebuilding on honesty rather than protective silence. Vincent visited his sister's hospital room the day after his nephew's birth, genuine, unguarded warmth crossing his features as he held the newborn for the first time. He's going to grow up in a family that actually tells each other the truth. Sophia's voice carried genuine, hard-won peace. Vincent's own expression carried complicated gratitude, because someone had the courage to interrupt a lie none of us could break through on our own. Marisol's own life transformed considerably in the weeks that followed, not through simple charity, but through genuine opportunity Vincent insisted on providing without conditions attached, beyond genuine respect for what she'd done. Her younger brother's education secured completely, her own long-abandoned path toward nursing reopened through resources that came with no strings requiring anything in return. "I don't know how to properly thank you for all of this." Marisol's voice carried genuine, overwhelmed gratitude during a quiet conversation with Vincent weeks after Daniel's arrest. "You already did the thanking that actually matters." Vincent's voice carried genuine, unguarded warmth. "You stepped into danger for a stranger without hesitation. Everything since has simply been ensuring that courage never costs you anything you didn't choose to give." Their relationship developed slowly, deliberately, neither of them rushing toward assuming that shared crisis automatically created connection between two people whose worlds remained genuinely, significantly different. Months later, Marisol stood in Rosalino's dining room on an ordinary Thursday evening, no longer bussing tables but seated at one as an invited guest, Sophia's newborn son, sleeping peacefully in a bassinet beside the table. Vincent sat across from her, his presence carrying none of the controlled danger that had defined every previous interaction between them. Simply present, simply choosing exactly where he wanted to be, on an evening that carried no crisis, no urgency, nothing but genuine, ordinary warmth. Strange being on this side of the table. Marisol's voice carried genuine, quiet amusement as she glanced around the restaurant she'd worked 8 exhausting months inside. Vincent's answering smile carried genuine, unguarded warmth. "I think you've earned considerably more than a seat at this particular table." Sophia joined them moments later, her son cradled carefully in her arms, settling into the booth beside Marisol with the specific, easy familiarity of genuine, hard-won friendship rather than simple gratitude. The 3 of them sat together in the restaurant's warm evening light, the specific, quiet miracle of a single instinctive act of courage rippling outward into genuine, lasting family, built entirely on choice rather than crisis or obligation. If this story kept you holding your breath from that dark parking lot to this final Thursday dinner, if it reminded you that real courage often looks like a stranger simply refusing to look away, subscribe right now, because we are not finished. Share this with someone who needs it today. Like this video, drop your city below, and turn on notifications.